Welcome to our podcast for college Catholics, where we discuss faith and spirituality from a Catholic perspective. I'm Father Patrick, and today we will be talking about the Fourth Commandment, honor your father and your mother. And for that we will be joined by Brother Daniel Heffernan, who is a brother of the Midas Christi religious order. And he was born in Michigan. He lived actually in Ypsilanti, Michigan. He lived in Florida, in England, and he joined Midas Christi in 2010. He made his final perpetual profession of religious vows on July 2nd, 2022. He lives now in our community here in Michigan, and if you want to know more about his personal vocation story, please check episode 71 of this podcast. Brother Daniel, how are you doing? Welcome to our podcast.
Hi, Father Patrick. Thanks for having me. Doing good. Doing well, I should say. But always great to participate in this great work of the podcast.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to have you. Good to have your wisdom and your literary prowess.
I don't know about that, but okay.
Yes. So anyway, in this episode, we will be talking about the Fourth Commandment, honor your father and your mother. However, what I wanted to do as an introduction to that commandment is that from the Fourth Commandment to the Sixth Commandment, we could say it's the second half of the Ten Commandments. The first three address or talk about honoring God and revering and adoring God. The second half, the fourth through the 10th, refer to the love of neighbor. And in that sense, they're summarized by what we read in the Gospel of St. John, chapter 13, that Jesus said to his disciples, love one another, even as I have loved you. And in another part, he summarizes the greatest commandment. He says it's to love God with all your heart and all your strength, and your neighbor as yourself. And this is what St. Paul says to the Romans in chapter 13, verses 8 through 10. He says, he who loves his neighbor has fulfilled the law. The commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not kill, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in the sentence, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to the neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. So this commandment then is obviously referring to our parents, but also it refers to the family, the structure of the family, and also the duties both of children toward their parents, but also duties of the parents toward their children, and also toward the siblings. So how do you read it, and how do you interpret this Fourth Commandment, Brother Daniel?
Well, I think you, Father, you made a good introduction, kind of putting the commandment in context, with the two great commandments being love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, and all your soul. That being first and foremost, and the second being love your neighbor as yourself. So this Fourth Commandment kind of begins that those commandments that refer to our neighbor. And we can think of it as those, it's sometimes depicted as the two tablets, right? So the first tablet being those three commandments that refer directly to God, and the second tablet, those seven commandments, right? And I think what's nice about it, and kind of relating it to the other commandments, is that it's phrased in a positive way.
Right. That's very good.
Right. It's not thou shalt not, which is most of the commandments say that. It's rather positive. So honor your father and mother. The only other one that's has that terminology is the third commandment, which is keep holy the Sabbath. So those two are kind of special in that way.
And one simple clarification for something you study in morality, moral theology, is that when you have a negative statement in a commandment or a rule, it clearly sets the limits, and therefore it has to be applied in every single moment or every single time. For example, you shall not kill. Well, that means that you can never kill anybody.
Right.
So it applies at all times. You're never killing anybody. Never, right?
Yeah.
So instead of it says, honor your father and mother, it is a positive commandment. So it indicates a duty, a responsibility, a directionality, right? A direction. It gives you guidance.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it means some limits, but it cannot be effectively applied at every single moment of the day, right? So sometimes
Sure.
you're doing something else or playing soccer. Well, you're not at that moment directly honoring your father and your mother. So it doesn't apply in every single moment, although it is an open-ended commandment, right? So
Right.
that's just a clarification for the positive and negative wording of those commandments.
Right. And I think another, as we dive into this commandment, another thing to say is you mentioned St. Paul at the beginning. In another of his letters, which is Ephesians chapter 6, which is actually quoted in the Catechism, he speaks of this commandment directly, and I'll just read it. He says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may be well with you and that you may live long on the earth." So he's basically telling us, honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise. So St. Paul tells us that, and it's true. The other commandments, the first three, they don't have a promise attached to it. Whereas if we read in Deuteronomy or Exodus, depending on the list of 10 commandments that we're reading, this one comes with a promise, and it says that you may be well, that it may be well with you, and your days may be long in the land that I have given to you. So that's a nice positive thing as well, right? That we there's a kind of a promise attached to it that if we honor and respect our parents, and we'll see how it applies to other commandments, we will have obviously the spiritual benefit, right? The reward in heaven, but even temporal benefits as well. Peace and peace and concord and all those good things that come from those healthy relationships as God created them.
Yeah, and in the same sense, failure to observe the commandment also will bring harm both to the individuals and to communities, because if doing something brings fruits and rewards, well, not doing something will be the opposite, will be negative, will be damaging to people.
Right. Yeah, and I think something that we've seen in our modern culture, our modern society, is how this idea of respecting, honoring our parents, our elders in general, those in authority over us, is not something that is held in high regard, because there's this emphasis, this overemphasis on freedom and independence and doing it your way. So in a certain sense, it's kind of frowned upon, right? But of course, we know if maybe our own experience or maybe our contact with families who truly love each other and respect each other, and everybody, parents towards their children and children towards their parents, there is a love and respect. We see that there's peace there. And so that's something that we struggle with in our modern culture. So we have to remind ourselves of the importance of this commandment, I feel,
Right. And in a sense, it reminds us that human beings, each one of us, we are social beings, right? And so there's an aspect of social love or love to those around you that starts at home. And that love, this commandment also indicates how, or shows how, the love toward your neighbor comes from the love of God. First, we have to love God above all things, and flowing from that love of God, we love those who are placed in the place of God in our lives, our parents, and those are in authority as well. We have to respect not only our parents but those in authority, and from there comes also the love to our neighbor, those around us. And our modern society kind of goes against all that. That's the order wanted by God, but our modern society is so concerned about the individual prosperity,
right,
quote unquote prosperity, because it's a skewed vision of prosperity, right? Monetary prosperity or success of me and myself.
Mm-hmm.
That many people, in order to prosper, in order to have it their own way, disregard the love for God, the love for their parents and authority, and the love for their neighbor.
Right. Yeah, and it's nice. The Catechism kind of situates this commandment in the context of the family, right? So, And that's what this commandment is all about, is the relationships between family members. And obviously then it branches out to other aspects of society. But, it points to the fact that the family is the original cell of human society. And the rest of society should respect that fundamental order. And of course we've seen in this modern age how when the family is attacked, when it's not a place of peace and love of God and love of neighbor, then everything kind of begins to fall apart.
Right. And in that sense, the root or the foundation of everything, and even of the family, is marriage, right? So how marriage and the family, clearly, the Catechism, the Church clearly states this, right? That the marriage and the family are ordered, so their goal are ordered to the good of the spouses. So their spiritual good is most important, right? Their salvation and their human good, but also to the protection and education of children. So that is the goal of marriage and goal of the family. So therefore, the family that is willed by God can be defined in a way, and that's what we see in the Catechism in number 2202. A man and a woman united in marriage together with their children form a family. So that's a pretty simple principle that we have to remember, right? So God created the family. It's not a human invention. It's not a human or societal invention. And that's why the Catechism also states that it's this institution of marriage is prior to any recognition by public authority. So the public authority doesn't create marriage and the family. Marriage and the family are created by God. When He creates man, He creates marriage and the family. And therefore, the human society and the public authority, the state, we could say, has the obligation to recognize, defend, and foster the values that help the family, because it's at the basis of society.
Right. Yeah, and the family has been considered traditionally as the domestic church, right? Which is a very powerful name for the family, right? We don't call anything else, any other society, besides the church itself, a church. So that's
what does a domestic church mean?
Well, domestic meaning, taken from the Latin, which means like home, right? House. So the family, the home, being a kind of reflection, in a certain sense, of the larger church, right?
So it's a church in miniature.
Right, I guess so. Yeah.
That's good. And also, it shows how there cannot be the church without the domestic church. So without the family, eventually we wouldn't have the church.
Right.
Because there wouldn't be Catholics, we wouldn't be people.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the importance of parents raising their children in the faith, educating them in the faith, is really what allows the church to continue, right? And what parents who help their children to grow and mature in their faith, and then eventually be open to God's call, right? And some of them will be called to be leaders in the church. Well, that's all slowly but surely helping the church to continue, which is pretty awesome.
Right, and the church, the family, this domestic church has the father, the mother, and the children. And it's interesting because that is like a symbol or a mirror of the Holy Trinity, right? So in the same way that in the Trinity we have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit in a communion of three persons and one God. Mm-hmm. So in the family we have a mirror of that. We have an image of that in the Father, the Mother, and the children. Of course, it's not the exact same thing, but it's just like an image, a symbol of the Trinity. But it is, in fact, a participation in that community. So just in the same way that God is a community of persons, the family is a union, a unity. It's a cell that has a plurality of people who are supposed to be in communion and love each other.
Right. And we can see that very clearly. A nice image of that is the Holy Family, right? It's kind of a special case because in this case, it's God become man. So the second person of the Holy Trinity is actually a member of a family. But it's a really beautiful model for all families because they loved each other and they were obedient, to the laws of God. And Jesus was obedient to his parents, right? And there was mutual respect and order and peace and harmony with crosses, of course, because it wasn't an easy life. But that's a beautiful image for us. And not only that, but it was 30 years of our Lord's life
Of course.
versus the 3 years of his public life. So by just living in a family setting for so long, he's showing us the importance of that.
Yeah, and the church always presented the Holy Family as a model for families, right? Saint Joseph, the father of the family, the leader, the one who works as a carpenter, the Virgin Mary who stays at home and takes care of the child Jesus and educates him and follows him and accompanies him, and also how she accompanies Saint Joseph, and each one supports each other and each one in his own role. And the child Jesus grows. It has been always a model of the family.
Right.
It doesn't mean that we have to do exactly the same thing as they did.
Sure.
Because the Virgin Mary was virgin, and Saint Joseph, kept her virginity, and
right.
Jesus Christ, as you said, the Son of God made man. But it's still a model in many, many ways, in ways of holiness and an ideal of holiness and virtue and love for each other.
Yeah.
Now, so we say that the family is then it's key to understand the family as a foundation for society, and this is why society and the civil authorities have an obligation to support the family, to recognize the family, and to support the family. And we read in the Catechism how civil authority should consider its duty to acknowledge the true nature of marriage and the family, to protect and foster them, to safeguard public morality, and to promote domestic prosperity, right? So the civil authority has to defend the values that God wants for the family.
Yeah.
And so in order to honor the family and assist the family, the Catechism very clearly states some principles, right? And it says it should ensure the freedom to establish a family. Okay, that seems basic, but in some places that may not have happened. Right? The freedom to establish a family, to have children, and to bring them up in keeping with the family's own moral and religious convictions. Second, the protection of the stability of marriage bond. So the protection and stability of the marriage bond, right? And the institution of the family. A third thing the state has to ensure is the freedom to profess one's faith. The right to private property, to free enterprise, to obtain work and housing, and the right to emigrate. In keeping with the country's institution, the right to medical care, to assistance for the aged, and the family benefits. The protection and security of health, especially with respect to dangers like drugs, pornography, and alcoholism, and the freedom to form associations with other families. So these are some things the Catechism says that the state should ensure, should recognize, and should grant to families, right?
Yeah.
So why don't we look at the duties, because we said this commandment places duties on the children, first and foremost, and I think that's because typically parents tend to love their children, right? And seek their well-being almost naturally.
Yeah.
Instead, children tend to forget everything that the parents did for them, right? So the commandment first and foremost addresses the children, tells us, hey, you need to remember your parents, because for many, many years, and this is something they tell many college students, right? Mm-hmm. For many years, you were ignorant of the world around you, ignorant meaning that you didn't know what was going on,
Right.
right? You were a baby, you were a toddler, and so forth, and your parents took care of you,
Mm-hmm.
and they had to wake up in the middle of the night,
Yes.
feed you, protect you, guard you from dangers, make sure everything was you had a company, you were not left alone, you were not left like disregarded in a corner, change their diapers, things that we take for granted, but that's a sacrifice that parents do, and therefore children have to recognize that and be grateful for that.
Yeah.
So one thing I was going to ask you, Brother Daniel, is how did you experience at home the protection of your parents, right? And how they helped you. Afterwards, we're going to enter into all the duties, right, of the
Sure.
family members. But how did they foster your vocation?
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting. This commandment kind of, in a certain sense, the way we live it changes or develops as we grow older. So, when we're very young children, we're more dependent on our parents for just about everything, right? And then as we grow older, we become a little more independent. But we shouldn't forget our parents, right? And we still do depend on them, and they still are providing for us up until, well, they never really stop providing for us, but especially until we leave home. In the middle, there's kind of we may take on a rebellious attitude, right? As
Teenage years,
exactly. It's a in a certain sense, it's kind of a natural thing. You want to kind of develop your own sense of independence, but it can go the wrong way, of course. We need to watch out with that development.
Right. So there's that moment where submission and obedience has to change to my own independence and making decisions for my own self.
Right.
And let's say providing for my own life and my own family.
Yeah.
So it's like a little plant that has a shoot, and that from that shoot comes another plant.
Right.
Well, at some point, there has to be a break, and that's a difficult moment, because in the human society, for human beings, it doesn't happen from one day to another. It happens throughout 5 years or 7 years, depends on how. And sometimes the world wants us to do it earlier, kind of to take advantage of our ill-advised independence, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes the parents expect us to still be obedient because we're their little babies,
Right.
So they expect us to be obedient to them a little longer.
Yeah,
so then
exactly.
there's that tension.
Yeah.
And that's a natural tension that has to be handled with virtue, charity, and respect.
Right. Yeah, it's a whole transitional period, which could be years in a certain sense. Where we move from needing to obey our parents to not actually needing to obey them, but we'll never should never stop doing is respecting them, right? So in my case, I have the grace of having two wonderful parents who brought me up in the faith, and I mean, I owe my faith and my growing in the faith, and I would say my vocation in a lot of ways to them.
Shout out to Mr. and Mrs. Heffernan.
Yes.
And prayers toward them.
Yes, please. So I mean, I was brought up in a very Catholic setting at home, and it was God had the primacy, and living our faith, practicing our faith, more than just attending Mass on Sundays, but trying to live our faith more and more was something that became very natural after a time. We loved to learn more about our faith and read about the saints, and
what were some practices that you remember as a child that stamped the faith in you? For example, in me, I remember very much my grandma praying the rosary when I came back from high school, right?
Yeah.
So what were some of the things that impacted you the most, you would say?
Sure. I think just like one thing that my dad would do is sometimes before Mass, we would sit in the living room, and he would kind of go through the readings of the day, and we would talk about what they would mean, right? So kind of bringing our life, the church, bringing it into, the center of our home and talking about it together, right? Parents and children, kind of making it real, right? Seeing how it applied to our lives. I would say things like that. Yeah, definitely the family rosary was very important. And I think just making like the lives of the saints available to us. We had a bunch of books, and I never felt like my parents were saying, you need to read this book. It was more like, wow, there's all these great saints. I'd love to, read up on this one, and I would. So it's very natural in that sense. They created the setting that was fruitful for a vocation to develop, and and my other siblings are married, so they obviously received the kind of preparation that they needed for their vocation. So I was very blessed, and I think in those teenage years, which we already spoke about as sometimes being tumultuous, where you want to rebel, do your own thing. It wasn't, I didn't have so many reasons to rebel, right? Because it's like, well, I've been brought up in the faith. The natural thing for me was to, I want to be holy. That's kind of what was instilled in me. And those crucial years where the vocation tends to develop, not always, sometimes it's later, sometimes it's earlier, but, my parents left me the freedom. It wasn't like they were like, you need to be a priest or something like that. It was, like I said, a very Catholic setting, and it was a natural setting for me to desire to give myself to God. And I think God used all those circumstances, those beautiful moments to draw me in. And my parents were always very supportive. Like I said, never pushing one way or the other, but praying for me, supporting me. Now, I would say in my case, they actually set me up to have a meeting with Father Caesar, who's our superior here in Michigan, and they kind of saw that I needed to talk to a priest at a moment in my life, and so they kind of set up that meeting for me. So I would say it was kind of an extraordinary thing, but it worked out really well, because here I am in Miles Christi. So I would say, they were very influential in my vocation, and continue to support me in that. So
right, because sometimes parents can help or insist too much, but in a good way, just that being in the background and seeing, okay, he's doing the right thing, so we're going to leave him go that way. He's going to retreat. But if he doesn't, like in my case, my mom insisted I should do a retreat once. You should do this retreat. You should, and I don't want to do the retreat. Yeah. But I think it's going to be good for you to do this retreat. So sometimes helping in that way, then in your case, or recommending spiritual direction, or speaking with a priest, or going to hey, you should go to confession a little bit more frequently, or even have in mind, sometimes parents tell their kids, right, you should have in mind whether God is calling you to marriage or to the priesthood. Yeah. And that is something that some parents don't do. And it's a very important recommendation. You're not telling them to do something. You're just showing them that there's this option and that option and that other option. Right.
And I think that was important. An important aspect growing up is that there was this idea of God has a plan for each one of us, and I need to discover what it is He wants me to do. Discover His will, which is not some ridiculous puzzle that I have to solve. It's not impossible, but I need to be open to whatever He wants. And they made that pretty clear in a natural way. The importance of following God's will, finding your vocation, also, right?
Right. So that ties into we can look a little bit at the duties of parents toward their children, right? So I would say, first of all, a basic duty of parents is for them to be examples of holiness, right? Or to try their best, to live a virtuous life, and to have in mind that their example is essential, right? So they say what a difference it makes when parents, both of them, go together to Mass on Sunday. Yeah. Right? The percentage of children that attend Mass and are faithful to their Catholic faith, when the parents attend Mass together, is exponentially better. Right. And if one of them doesn't go because they don't want to go, then it drops a lot. And if the father doesn't go, it drops a lot. If the mother doesn't go, it drops so much. And so being a good example is one first duty, right? Because as here the Catechism says, they have to extend their moral education and their spiritual formation to their children, right? And so they need to be first formed and educated in the faith to the best of their ability, of course, each one according to his possibilities, and then be an example to their children. And they have the right and the duty, so the right and the duty to educate their children, and that in the faith and in the human life and human virtues. And that is a right that is primordial and inalienable. Right? That's what the Catechism says. So the parents must remember that their children are, of course, children of God and human persons as well, right? And therefore they have to create an environment, they have the responsibility to create an environment where the human person can develop, the human person can learn, and the faith can flourish. Where they have to create a home, right? They have to create a home where there's tenderness, forgiveness, respect, fidelity, and service to one another. Another important thing that parents have is their the human education of their children. Whatever they don't teach them, they cannot expect someone else to necessarily teach. Sometimes there are things that people teach, some other teachers will do, but the parents have to make sure the human formation of their children is up to them. And in that sense, one last thing that the Catechism expresses is that the parents also have to evangelize their children. They have to pass on the faith. And that is an essential duty because the church trusts the parents with that first responsibility of educating in the faith.
Yeah.
So anyway, those are some responsibilities of the parents. Now, why don't we look at the responsibilities or duties of the children toward their parents? What are some of those duties?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned before, I think those duties kind of change or develop as children grow older, right? As younger children, or I'd say teenage children, they do have a duty to obey their parents. As they grow older, or as they're in their later teen years, maybe they're given a little more independence. So,
one just a question right there, because it's important, to understand why this obedience. Why do the children have to obey the parents, and to what extent do they have to obey, even in the childhood? Right? We always say you have to obey your parents. That's a basic principle.
Right.
But do they always have to obey the children, or are there some cases, and why do they have to obey?
Right. Well, they have to obey their parents because their parents are representing God. God has kind of put them over their children, right? As as His representative. So in that sense,
they participate in the authority of God.
Exactly. Yeah, their authority is coming from God. And yeah, that's the way he set it up. It's natural too, right? I mean, young children especially, they're more helpless and they're so dependent. If they don't obey their parents, they're going to get into trouble, or danger.
In life.
Or danger. In life too, of course, yeah. So yeah, I mean, obedience is a big one.
And what is the extent of that obedience?
Right, yes. And the extent, well, obviously, if it's something that goes against, the moral order, something that's against their conscience as sinful, then they shouldn't obey it.
Right. So in that sense, what I try to explain sometimes to kids, right? We obey our parents because we want to obey God through them, right? So we obey our parents insofar as they command and they direct us according to the will of God. So if we see clearly that at one point the will of God is opposed to what our parents tell us, we should obey God first, of course, with prudence, right? And with honor, still with respect.
Yeah.
But if my parents tell me to do something that is clearly sinful against the will of God, well, I should see how to avoid that, to ultimately not obey things that will offend God or my neighbor. And there's many examples of sometimes parents abusing their authority in expecting things from their children that are sinful or illegal or wrong, simply.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and some other aspects, duties of children toward their parents would be gratitude, and there's plenty to be grateful for, and to show that to their parents, right? It mentions docility. The Catechism mentions docility. It's kind of linked to obedience, but we could obey and kind of drag our feet and not be happy about it, and in a certain sense, we'd be obeying our parents. But if we're not docile, we should obey them because we love them and because we trust them. Because they are looking out for us and wanting the best for us and wanting us to grow.
Right.
And docility, right?
Right. Because obedience, one can understand obedience like doing what they command me to do.
Right.
But if they don't command me to do anything, then I do my own thing.
Yeah.
While docility implies not only doing with a good spirit those things that they command you,
mm-hmm.
but also to try to understand what is their purpose in commanding this or that, or in saying this or that, and helping out, helping out in the house. Hey, take the trash out. Don't. Your parents shouldn't command you to take the trash out,
right,
for you to help out. Come on.
Yeah.
So that's where docility comes in.
Yeah.
So it's a sort of respect, is a more ample concept of obedience.
Yeah, for sure.
And what other some of the responsibilities, for example, of children, or younger or middle-aged or grown children?
Besides that, honor and respecting them, I think, it's maybe it's not a command, but asking their advice, and I think this is applicable, especially in, college years, asking your parents' advice. Sometimes we think we know it all, but they've been around the block, they've lived longer. They know us really well, so they might know what's good for us too. So asking their advice doesn't mean you have to do exactly what they say every single time, especially as an adult. But they want to help out, hear them out, listen to them, show them that you care by asking their advice, and I think this is kind of moving on to our duties as sons and daughters, maybe as adults, is talking to them, visiting them, calling them if you're in college, you're in a different state. Call them every week or every couple weeks. See how they're doing. Show them that you haven't forgotten about them. Small things that go a long way. Right,
and also to have in mind that they are really concerned for you. Right, I talk to many parents about their college kids, and they are really concerned how they're doing, what's going on, do they have food to eat, and sometimes you may say, well, they know how to fend for themselves. Yeah, but the parents want the kids to be well.
Yeah.
So it's good for you as a college student, to reach out to them and be docile in that sense, and sometimes spend time that we might want to be with our friends or girlfriend or sports or play video games.
Yeah.
And say, no, this commandment gives me the obligation to see how my parents are doing and to see how they are concerned about me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then another responsibility of grown children is when they're already adults and married and with their own children, right? To bring in a sense, share their children with their parents, so the grandchildren, right? And let them see, because that's a fruit of their labor as well.
For sure.
And many times they can take care of the kids and help out a little bit, but it's important for them as an older couple, parents, right, grandparents now,
mm-hmm.
to have that consolation of seeing their grandchildren.
Right.
And it would be very damaging for the grandparents to never see their grandchildren.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it works both ways. The grandparents, they would do anything for the grandchildren, and they're a huge help, when the time comes to, help take care of the kids. And it's really nice to see. My parents have become grandparents recently, and that's beautiful to see them in this kind of new role, a kind of new kind of parenthood. It's different, of course, but as grandparents, and that's really beautiful to see.
Right, and many times the grandchildren, for some reason, feel worse with the death of their grandparents than the death of the parents. For some,
could be.
There's some. They love everyone.
Yeah.
Okay. It's terrible when the parents die, of course.
Right.
But when the grandparents or the grandma or the grandpa, someone, in that age,
Yeah.
there was a connection and a link that is very important,
Yeah.
I think that can happen many times,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a great thing to see how God in his wisdom set up the human family where each one has their own role, right?
Yeah.
And the grandparents have a role. And another duty of children that are adult now toward their grandparents is expressed by the Catechism, right? It says, as much as they can, they must give them material and moral support in old age and in times of illness, loneliness, or distress, right?
Yeah.
So not to forget the grandparents, not to leave them alone,
Yeah.
but keep them as part of the family.
Right.
Because as parents grow older, they have their illnesses and their difficulties and their challenges, and that's precisely when the roles are reverted in a sense, right?
Absolutely.
So when we were children, our parents took care of us because we were completely
helpless
in the world. And as our parents begin to be helpless, so we as children have to provide support for them.
Yeah. They become more dependent, right?
Well, what are some general thoughts that you would like to give us to wrap up this episode?
Great question. I basically shared what I thought was most pertinent, and kind of my advice for college students in their way to respect their parents. But I would say one thing that we haven't mentioned too much is to pray for your parents, and your grandparents for that matter. To not, because they've prayed for us so many times, right? We can think of Saint Monica, for example, praying for her son, Saint Augustine, who was very, very much led astray. But her prayers and her tears brought him back. So I think in the same way, we should also pray for our parents. I think it's another duty towards them. And yeah, that's kind of my last thought.
All right, and another thought that I remember, the Catechism explicitly speaks about this. And while giving importance to the love that children have to their parents and parents to their children, at the same time it says that that's not the ultimate love. The ultimate love is toward God. And this is why sometimes it says family ties are important, but not absolute, right?
Yeah.
So there's the thing that's absolute and primordial is the love for God. And because of that love for God, we love our family, we love our parents, and because God wanted this human society, we could call it, the human nucleus or union of the family, the unit of the family.
Yeah.
And therefore, sometimes God may call individuals to consecrated life. God may call individuals to the love of God, to love God above all, and to relinquish everything else in the world. So they become, consecrated people become, in a sense, part of God's family, right? So sometimes parents may feel like their children don't love them anymore because they want to go to consecrated life, right? And in that sense, the Catechism says, no, it's not because they don't love parents, it's because God has called them, right? With a greater love. And therefore, it says the following, in number 2233, parents should welcome and respect with joy and thanksgiving the Lord's call to one of their children to follow him in virginity for the sake of the kingdom, in the consecrated life or in the priestly ministry. So I would say not only should they not be disappointed, right, but they should be honored, right, that God has called a young man or young woman to the priesthood, to religious life, to the consecrated life, to be a brother like you, Brother Daniel.
Exactly.
So it's an honor for the parents because of all the thousands and thousands of families that are out there, he chose this family to give the gift of a religious vocation. So I think that is a gift that speaks about how good the parents were in that sense.
And they can even take the step of praying for that, as they're raising their family, for parents to pray, God, if you want, to call one of our sons and daughters, that would be our a tremendous happiness, right? And to kind of make themselves available to God, right? I think that's a beautiful prayer too. Obviously, He's going to do whatever His plan is, but He wants to hear our prayers, and those are beautiful prayers as well.
Right, and God can call vocations from anywhere in the world. He can make children of God from the rocks, as the gospel says. However, usually the normal thing that God does is to call religious vocations from good families.
Yeah.
So this is why the world wants to destroy the family, because the world knows that behind good families are other apostles and religious vocations and future priests and nuns and consecrated men and women, right? So let us pray then. I encourage everyone to pray for good, holy families that will bring good parents, good children, and also good vocations to the church. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, brother, for sharing all your thoughts.
You're welcome, Father. No problem at all.
And thank you, everyone, for being with us today. That will be all for today. May the Holy Family intercede for us and always protect all of us. Please share this episode with your friends, and if you can, please leave a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. As you know, you can also find us now on YouTube, so make sure you leave some comments there as well. Hope to see you next time. May God bless your day.